New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the U.S., and within it lies a little humble town with a long history. With a population that was a puny 3,000 back in the 50s, it has since exploded to a little over 9,000 as of 2023, full of spirited people who love their community and the people in it. It is home to many passionate and diverse citizens who grew up here, started families, and even had kids of their own. The name of the town I am referring to is none other than Clayton. Clayton's earliest history dates back to 1730, when a family of immigrants, Felix Fissler, and his family left their home in Switzerland to board a ship on the path to the New World. On that same ship was another family with a daughter by the name of Sophia Klein, who years later would marry one of the Fissler boys, Jacob. Although Jacob and his wife originally started out located near Swedesboro, New Jersey, Jacob would later go on to purchase 2,800 acres of land near what is now Cedar Green Cemetery, where he would build a home and move inland with his family and all their belongings. A second cabin was built later on during the Revolutionary War. The second cabin was located on the land between the Malaga Turnpike, which is now presently named Delsey Drive, Route 47, and the Road to Fissler's Mill, also known as the Road to Fry's Mill, which is now known as Academy Street. Jacob and his son jointly bought 3,755 acres of land and expanded the Fissler territory ever more. Naturally, as their land expanded, so did the population. Families would slowly start to move in, and by 1812, 36 families had settled in town. Now, as you may or may not know, Clayton has a long history in glass blowing and glass works, so let's cover that next. John Mayhew Moore was born on January 1st, 1827. In 1856, he bought Fisslerville Glassworks and spent the next 4 years revitalizing it and acquiring more land. In the 1860s, he renamed it J.M. Moore & Co. together with his brother Wilson. They designed and developed Clayton, and it was known as the best planned town in South Jersey. They used their funds to build churches, some of which still exist today. By 1866, Fisslerville had 3 fully staffed glassblowing factories employing many workers, including minors of 16 years of age and under, due to the abundance of glass sand at the time. Moore was generous and would treat employees to a day in the sun, which really meant a trip to Cape May. The money earned was invested in the construction of churches and mansions, which became landmarks. In 1886, a glassblower strike occurred, organized by the Knights of Labor. The Clayton glassblowers resolved the issue themselves and returned to work. Glassworks were vital to the town, so much so that 4 large factories covered 15 acres by themselves. The Moore brothers eventually had to close their factory in 1912, but William Henry Clevenger would open his own glasswork factory that same year. Clevenger, a skilled glass shearer, had worked for the Moore brothers since 1890. He taught his sons the craft. Over time, though, the family would gradually decline over the years. The lack of experienced glass blowers led to the factory's closure in 1964. The last known member of the Clevenger family, Thomas Clevenger Jr., died at the impressive age of 100 years old on March 31st, 2006. Clayton's first ever high school was the Academy Street School and was built on September 18, 1908. It cost roughly about $40,000, and it was constructed with primary through high school grades in mind and was meant to replace a much smaller 2-room schoolhouse built on the same land in 1883. The school was used for educational purposes during the day and would be utilized for religious purposes in the evening, until Clayton's first church was eventually created in the year 1850. Here is a picture of Clayton High School's first graduating class. The school opened in 1909, and 4 years later, these students pictured here were the first ever to graduate from it. The local football field was named after Nana E. Haupt, a math teacher who was the first principal of the new Clayton High School. But she was more so remembered by students for how she used to shake her keys to warn students that she was coming, and they would act properly. On a postcard, the addition that was built behind the original school can be seen. It was built in 1923 to accommodate Clayton's rising population of students, and its purpose was to have a wing for high school students and an auditorium. Because it was within walking distance of many students' homes, the Clayton schools provided crossing guards at every major intersection. Charles Pop Kramer was Clayton High's phys ed teacher who joined in September of 1925. Eventually, the Academy Street School would need a refurbishing, but due to the funds it would have required, a new elementary school was built instead. The location chosen was mid-block of Chestnut Street and Erie Avenue, and the school would open in 1989. The brand new elementary school would be named Herma S. Simmons, which was named after a Clayton High School alumni who returned to become a teacher and coach at the school. Here is an aerial view of Clayton taken during the 1960s. Clayton has developed plenty in its many years, so naturally its needs changed over time. New buildings were erected and older buildings were refurbished. Those that weren't were lost to time and no longer used. With that in mind, in this part we will be focusing on the town's historic buildings. This house right here used to be a glass factory named F.M. Pierce & Co. It was originally started as Fissler and Morgan Co., which at one point was also known as Clayton Bottle Works. The owner, Franklin Pierce, built a very nice home pictured here. If you visit the southeast corner of Broad and Center Street, you can see that it still stands today. There used to be a Clayton Hotel in town, but it began as the Davis Hotel, which would not be the only other name it would go under. It had many owners and names, such as Hibbard's Hotel, Schwenk's Hotel, Masso Hotel, and eventually the Rainbow Inn. In 1995, the hotel would unfortunately be destroyed in a fire, being rebuilt and becoming the newly constructed Rainbow Inn. Yet another historic building in Clayton would be the Clayton National Bank, later known as Citizens Bank, but presently known as Fulton Bank. Clayton National Bank opened for business on Friday, February 2nd, 1914. For years, the Twin Kiss ice cream shop has been a popular hangout spot for the teens of Clayton and surrounding towns as well. The original building was a trailer that was transported into town and placed at its location. The name Twin Kiss was quite well known at the time because the franchise held the patent on twist cones. It was also highly regarded for the root beer that was made on site. Later on, a building named the Clayton Diner would be constructed, but over time, its name would change to the Liberty Diner. Well, I think we've done enough talking. Now let's hand it over to Mr. Gassler, the author of the book, and let's ask him some questions. Question 1. What gave you the motivation or inspired you to create this book?
All right. When I first came to Clayton, which was in 2008, when I came here to teach, for years I had always gone to like Barnes & Noble, and I looked at the section that has those kind of books, because I'd always look, I'm like, where's the Clayton book? Where's the Clayton book? Where's the Clayton book? And then when I came here, I went to Mr. Field, because he was in charge of the Clayton Historic Society, Preservation Society, and I asked him, like, why didn't anybody ever make the book? And he's like, well, every time they come, nobody's interested in doing it. I was like, well, if they call again, you tell them that I'm interested in doing it. Honestly, it was like maybe a month later that they actually contacted him again. He put them in contact with me, and then the process started as far as the book. It's just the fact I always wanted a Clayton book to be sitting there when I went to Barnes & Noble is the whole inspiration.
Question 2. What would you say is the biggest or most interesting change in Clayton's history overall?
There's been a lot, but the one that popped into my mind was just that, because ever since I lived here, there's always been an Acme there. But before the Acme was there was a house there. And I'll use the word mansion, because that's what it was described as. But it's just weird to me that somebody just lived in like the center of Clayton, like just there. Like their house was in the middle and it was just their yard all around it. It was fenced all around. So that whole block was just a house with a pool. And like, to me, it's just weird to be like, look at my house in the town of Clayton. So that was that's the weirdest thing. And it's like, really? It was a house first? But yeah, that was the main one.
How would you describe your personal connection to Clayton?
Well, I grew up here, so my personal, like, I used to live, now it's an off-ramp for 55, so I used to live on Buck Road. So kindergarten, I went to Orr School, but in first grade in 1980, I moved to Clayton, and it's just, this has been my home. And I've always had Clayton pride. I've always had Clipper pride. I was always liked my town. Most of it's like when I think about growing up and like the man I became, I owe to the people that I grew up with in this town. I have many friends that still live in town. The bonds that I made in high school and the friends that I have in high school, I know I could call right now and they would be there if I needed them. So it's always had a special place in my heart. Like I'm one of those, like, this is my hometown. That's right. So I just always had pride in my hometown.
Are there any challenges that you experienced during writing this?
The biggest challenge was just getting the pictures together. It's much different now. It's much more organized now. But when I started working at the museum, finding pictures that were of a decent quality that I could scan and use for the book were hard to find because they would be just in a file in the back underneath something, and just sometimes I'd be going through something, I'd be like, well, this is a good one, and then I'd scan it and then use it, and to be in the book it had to be a certain quality. So some of them were scans of scans and stuff like that. Sometimes I'd find a copy that was a printed copy of a picture that I never saw, and then I would find the picture and be like, found it. So the biggest challenge was finding the pictures to be able to fill up the whole book.
Are there any details you may have left out of the book for any reason?
No details that I left out of the book purposefully in any kind of way. The one thing I will say, and this is a plug for him, his name is Rich Shivers, and he's on Facebook, and he is constantly posting Clayton history photos. So like if you read the book and you're like, wow, I wish I had more, you could friend him and just go through his news feed, because he's constantly just posting and just giving a history. Like to be honest, his Facebook post might probably be more than what's in the book right now. He could probably take what he has that I didn't even know he had, but that he has and make like a volume 2 and a volume 3. Like he has so much stuff. So there wasn't anything that I purposely left out of the book, but there's definitely more to be learned. And he would be the #1 source to be able to see all those pictures and learn all that kind of history about our town.
If you had to pick only 3 things from the book, what would you say is the most important for people to know?
I can't pick 3. I'm just going to say the biggest. As far as the history of our town, is just knowing why our town came about, and the fact that the glass blowing industry, like that, is what started here. That's what got the town to grow up, and just the interesting nature of just like, all right, this is what we do here. Let's build a place for people to eat, a place for people to shop. So it just kind of built out of that. I think it's interesting to know that that's how the town came, and then you can find out how towns around us, many of them also, like Glass, same type of thing, but then Pittman was different. So like just knowing how our neighbors also became towns and stuff like that. There's a lot of towns that are kind of incorporated into other towns. Like even though they still exist, they're still a part of a bigger unit, whereas Clayton has stayed, like we are our own thing. We have our own school, we have our own government, stuff like that. We've stayed a town even in the midst of other small towns becoming part of something bigger. Like we've maintained our autonomy. That to me, the history of how we became Clayton. And the biggest mystery is how we became Clayton. That would be one of the ones that if anyone wanted to solve, they could try to figure that one out, because it used to be Fizzlerville, and then it changed to Clayton. There's no definite historical, like accurate record, that's the word I was looking for, as to why we changed to Clayton.
Thank you for your time.
Each year when spring rolled around, so would the most exciting event of the season, the arrival of Rex and Ruby Johnson. The Johnsons leased the lake from the Wilsons every summer, and it was filled with locals and people from all over South Jersey. They would sell refreshments to those who visited the lake and would hold dances. Fry's Mill Dam was the stream that ran through Scotland Run. Before the Wilsons owned the land, the lake was called Fry's Mill Pond, and the Fry's family owned and operated a mill there. As years passed, George and Seymour Wilson built cabins. They were designed as summer rentals, but renters convinced them to allow them to be used for year-round housing. Clayton's other body of water was at one time called Harding Pond, and later called Moore's Lake before it received its most notable name, Silver Lake, in 1917. Glassworks companies would spend vacation time here in the summer. Silver's interest in the area first began when he was a child and the lake was a local swimming hole. After purchasing it in 1917, he oversaw maintenance of the water and formed an association to help with the lake's upkeep. On August 22, 1923, the association offered shares to its members. Soon after this, the once unattractive pond was turned into a recreational paradise. In 1991, a fire raged through the prominent Georgian-style structure, reducing it to a pile of rubble in just a few hours. The most recognizable piece left standing was the shell of the bell tower. The church had a parsonage that was also donated by the Moore brothers, which was located in the northwest corner of Delsey Drive and Clayton Avenue. The original church building was constructed on an old brickyard in 1869 for $11,500. Almost immediately after the fire destroyed it, the plan to rebuild it as the first Presbyterian church began. It was never determined if the fire was arson. In May of 1992, the church was rebuilt. The Trinity United Methodist Church began in the home of John Early in 1770. In 1812, Jacob and Jane Fissler gifted 2 acres of land to be used for the location of the useful schoolhouse, which was a school during the week and a church on Sundays. In 1853, the first church building was constructed for $5,000 on the land where the present church is located. However, in 1978, the Methodist Church would burn down. A new church would be built in 1981. St. Catherine of Siena was organized in 1943 as a mission of St. Bridget Parish of Glassboro. The property on the southwest corner of North Street and Delsey Drive was purchased in 1944, and was renovated into a chapel. They held their first Mass there on Christmas Eve in 1944. The property where the current church was located was purchased back in 1946 by the Warwick family.
And that brings us to today. I encourage you all to get out there and experience this wonderful town as it is now. After all, no telling when something may change. Whether you came into this knowing nothing or if you're a Clayton history buff, above all else, I want this to deepen your appreciation of Clayton and its past. It was an absolute pleasure to share this with you all today, and I recommend that you go read Mr. Gassler's book, Images of America, Clayton, which details all that you would need to know about this town's history, and is where I received all my information from. This project was only possible due to his wonderful book, so please go out and buy it if you can. I'd consider it worth the purchase.